My name is Lara Lashus. I'm a member of Youth Spin, and this is my defense of the Femme Fatale. The Femme Fatale, French translation, the fatal woman, is a common film and literary trope started in Judeo-Christian mythology, but popularized in the context of contemporary American society in film noir, which is 1940s and 50s Hollywood. Although it has been analyzed as an art history archetype, appearing in various different cultures through the years as well. Who is she? She's elusive. She's captivating. She's so temptingly seductive. But that means she's dangerous. She has dark and reckless intentions. She's naive, and she makes him a fool. She is deadly, and she's the star of the show. But what if she's not those things? What if that's the role she's actually playing? And what if, in reality, away from discourse and deliberation, that's not how she's perceived? I perceive the femme fatale differently, and I believe the way she is resolved leaves out a lot of lost narrative. In most feminist discourse, third-wave feminism in particular, there is a popular understanding that the femme fatale is the epitome of the male gaze, and she perpetuates misogyny. Ultimately, she is an outdated and upsetting to see trope. This is so ironic, however, because these feminists have limited themselves to only perceiving her from a male gaze, when the female gaze of this archetype is distinctly so empowering and interesting. Although the male gaze has always had priority in our society, the female gaze is just as relevant, and it's a shame that the femme fatale isn't given credit under this perspective. She's inspiring. She's compelling. She's not playing a mother or an object. She's dominant in the story, and her sexiness, her looks, and her fetishization become immediate signals of power. Let's start with her backstory. Prominence of the femme fatale figure grew during the Romanticism period, which was a time where gender tension was heightened stemming from the Victorian era, when female crime and violence was increasing, which seemed unnatural and inexplicable. In reality, those crimes were being committed out of poverty and desperation in preservation of the rest of their family. While the early Hollywood culture was still developing, late 19th century Fox Studios would exploit the then popular art and style inspiration of ancient religions, Orientalism, and mythical creatures to then create and distribute stereotypes of Eastern Europeans and combine them with a vamp, exotic-looking actress to reinforce damaging anti-immigrant sentiment, while simultaneously strengthening a shifty, seductive, feminine character that would go on to influence film noir. Late 1940s and 50s cinema makes up film noir, a movie theme characterized by paranoia, gloom, hopelessness, and anxiety, created by the use of darkness, done by lighting and psychology, darkness separate from the films just being in black and white. Detectives, mystery, and ambiguity are key points of a film noir, and it's emphasized by post-World War depression and economic uncertainty. In context, women had just been introduced to the American workforce during World War II, and now that the war was over and the resource scramble had calmed, traditional families went back to being the happy, healthy American expectation, and women would leave the workforce and that related independence, which was disorienting and disappointing. The femme fatale rejected this. She wasn't retreating to the house and to children. She was in lush fashion and strategically getting what's hers. Often her motivation is ambition, but because she's a woman, she has to play it off oblivious, emotional, and coaxingly. Because ultimately, female ambition is dangerous and inappropriate. Sometimes the woman isn't dangerous at all. The trope isn't encouraging violence or danger, but it's a male projection onto her that results in murder, and she should not be held at fault. It's her desire for freedom, wealth, or independence that's the problem, which makes her the problem. When in reality, none of these qualities or aspirations make her the villain, and we know this. but credit is still not granted to her for the escape she gave women viewing. In the 1946 film Gilda, her promiscuity was a performance to get under the protagonist's, Johnny's, skin, and Gilda had always been faithful to her male partners. But through Johnny's eyes, Gilda is a psychological tormentor, and her famous striptease is not coded as sexy to him, but as manipulative and deceitful. While the striptease as a concept has traditionally been a male fantasy, it instead rouses frustration in Johnny, and he has her dragged off stage. Contrastingly, this striptease is actually very powerful for women. Michelle McCure writes, "By causing this tension for Johnny, Gilda prevents the satisfaction of his desire to control her. Gilda successfully uses her objectification to produce a pleasureless experience for her subject, a frustrating one. In fact, what she is really doing by performing for Johnny on and off stage is teaching him and the viewer a lesson, that his and our relationship with her should not be one of subject versus object." Women noticed and could internalize this because they were a huge part of the audience going to the movie theaters, as most men were away in World War II, which means women back then were actually big supporters, taking up most of the viewership. Angela Martin writes, "There has to be something in these film noirs for female spectators. Whether it was the treat of seeing women giving as good, if not better, than they got, the idea that men and women can be equally evil or equally innocent, confirmation of the existence of masculine perversity, or simply the refreshingly life-sized image of male fallibility." Feminist film theorist Jackie Stacey interviewed British women who went to the movies in the 40s and 50s to research attitudes towards actresses of the time. She observed that not only did a lot of these women admire the beauty of the actresses, but they also admire the way she handled situations, which goes to show how powerful the full character development allowed to female characters was in that time period, and how exciting it is to still see today. Obviously, this trope is expansive, and consequently many characters are pigeonholed to this definition that doesn't match or reflect all of their nuances or storyline. Also, these movies carry mixed interpretations, obviously, as that is the whole foundation for this piece. Sometimes the characters that are labeled with this trope have a final character arc that diminishes a lot of the positive and liberating aspects of her scenes and personality. Sexual liberation is noted throughout many of these films until their finalizing plot points when they become the good girl and settle down and wear modest clothes, when really she should have the right to have the same freedom and autonomy over her desires that she got before when she was, from the male gaze, the problem. This trope also shows complex issues when race is involved, which femme fatales of color were very rarely seen in film noir, when her empowerment is no longer so simply perceived by women of the time. In these instances, Black women characters are subjected to racist acts of violence that severity was so often subdued and ignored by the prejudiced white viewership and the formulaic design of the storyline at that point, which made her freedom less real, her objectification more dangerous, and the escapism not applicable. Apart from these valid pitfalls and complications, I love the femme fatale and what she offered for women of that century, as well as for the familiar power she brings now, when new characters come on screen to join many others in their placement of this intelligent trope. When they had the earthquake in